After everyone got ready to set sail, Howard took the helm of his monster yacht, aptly named Big Game, and Sean and I untied ourselves from the mooring lines. Howard led us away from the dock and away from the other boats. Once we were far enough away, he turned on the diesel engines, and the boat accelerated to a top speed of 17 knots. It wasn't a speedboat, but for its large size, it was moving pretty fast. He once told us that he had worked with engineers to improve it so that its maximum cruising speed was 13 knots. The speed combined with the slight surf created a nice splash as the bow of the boat swept over every crest. It was a thrilling sight, and everyone was enjoying themselves immensely. After about 20 minutes of this, it slowed down and finally stopped near the bay. From the side of the boat, he could see the beach, like most beaches around here, with almost white sand and crystal clear water gently rolling back and forth. Howard pushed the button to drop anchor and announced that we had arrived. There was a chorus of cheers throughout the yacht, and everyone hurried to the back deck. Tanya was the last to go up, followed by 4 others. She quickly introduced them all. "Everyone, these are my friends who came with me. Howard already knows them all, but I thought I'd introduce them since we're all going to have a good time here. From left to right is my agent and friend Tyrone, and next to him is his husband Michael. Next to Michael is my best friend since childhood, Diana, and her husband Marcus." Howard spoke up. "Thank you for that, Tanya. My local friends are Sean, whom you have already met. The other gentleman is James, the pilot of that seaplane you saw. His daughter and her friend are with him. Ladies, I'm sorry, but I've already forgotten your names." My daughter blushed slightly and introduced herself again. "My name is Madison, but all my friends call me Maddie. This is Sarah, my girlfriend. We go to school together. I'm honored to be here, by the way. Thank you for making this trip special, and we've only been here for a few hours." Everyone laughed at this introduction and then moved on to the fun. Maddie and Sarah jumped into the water right away, and when they rose to the surface, they were playfully splashing into each other. Sean came in next, showering everyone with cannonball splashes that got on our clothes. I don't think anyone cared. The agent and Tanya's husband came to the edge, and finally Michael pushed Tyrone over the edge. Tyrone plunged into the water belly first, screaming all the while, "Ah!" He made a big splash and made a slapping sound that made everyone flinch. Michael jumped in after him, but his husband dunked him under the water for doing so. I sat down for a moment, enjoying the rest of my drink and watching everyone having fun. Tanya sat next to me and just smiled. Honestly, without all the movie glitz and makeup, she was a strikingly beautiful woman. Her gorgeous blonde hair contrasted perfectly with her pale skin and freckled shoulders. Her eyes were almost emerald green, and I could have gotten lost in those puddles for days. I had to shake my head to snap out of my trance. I think she asked me a question. Sorry, I was a little distracted. What was that? I asked, hoping I didn't look too stupid. I was just asking if you like living here, that's all. I live in busy LA, but sometimes I wish I could get away from the world and live here in peace like you do. Well, I like it here. I haven't been to LA, but I can tell you it's great here compared to where I came from. Virginia was fine, but this place is just unrelatable sometimes. So what brought you here? Why such a big move? She asked curiously. My face lowered a little and she noticed it. Oh, I didn't mean to pry, I was just curious, she tried to backtrack. Oh no, it's fine, really. I just needed to get out of a bad situation, that's all. I paused, not knowing how much I should tell this goddess. I continued. My wife was having an affair and my business partner tried to kill me to take my half of our business. The shocked look on her face spoke volumes, and I realized I had probably said too much. I tried to tone it down a bit. Honestly, things were pretty crazy for a while, but things are working out just fine now. I have my airplane, this paradise, my daughter who I love more than anything in the world, and my friends here. Honestly, I feel better about it now. The shocked look disappeared and she regained her composure. I'm really sorry about that. I'm glad to hear you're doing well. It sounds really awful, she added with a laugh. Okay, why don't we change the subject? I think we've had enough for today, don't you? After all, we're in Hawaii. She smiled, happiness clearly bubbling inside her. I joined in her laughter. Sure, you want to talk about yourself? I'm pretty sure no one ever asks about your life, right? My sarcasm was enough to make us both laugh again. She was surprisingly easy to talk to, no matter what. I know I'm a bit stereotypical, but I always expected superstars to be lofty and unapproachable. I guess some of them were, but not Tanya. She sounded as down-to-earth as any normal woman I'd ever met. Sure, James, let's talk about me. What do you want to know? She asked, biting her lower lip nervously. I even thought it was cute. Tanya, we really don't need to dig into this. I'd like to get to know you better, but I'm not going to pry news out of you or anything. Of course you're not going to. I trust you. I know we just met, but I trust you. If you want to get to know me better, just ask. She smiled, showing off her gleaming white teeth. It was a beautiful smile for such a nice lady. Okay, then the basics. Where are you from? Ah, that's easy. I grew up in Nebraska, actually. A small town called Hastings, just south of I-80 and Grand Island Highway. Hastings isn't that small by Nebraska standards, but where I live now, it looks like a village. She chuckled lightly at her own joke. My parents still live there along with my brother. He just turned 19, and he's going to army camp this summer. My sister is married and lives in Minneapolis with her husband. They're expecting their first child sometime in January. Wow, that sounds like a really great family. How often do you get to see them? Not as often as I'd like. I usually come home for the holidays, but lately that seems to be it. I had to sneak through the back door of the flower store to take this little vacation. Talk about acting like a spy just to get away. It must not be easy, all this attention and everything. Honestly, I don't know how anyone manages it. She tensed a little when I spoke. I don't mean to offend you. I just don't think this kind of life is for me. I think you're a brave person for putting up with it for the sake of your career. She visibly relaxed and was her old self. Thank you. Yes, it can be hard at times, but for the most part, I'm used to it. Honestly, the thing I hate the most is how fake most of the people around me are. I mean, this conversation is the most real and honest I've had in the last 6 months. Everyone around me is usually trying to either blow smoke up my ass or beg for money for one project or another. It gets tiresome fast. Diana helps, but she has her own life and can't be around all the time just for me. Okay, enough about you and your boring life. My sarcasm apparently knows no bounds. How about we talk about your vacation this week? How long do you plan on staying here and what do you want to do while you're here? Thanks. Well, my main goal was to relax and just enjoy being away from everything for a week. I plan to stay until Saturday, which is only 6 days. This, she raised her glass and waved it between the two of us, is exactly what I was hoping for when I left. I nodded, raised my glass and proclaimed, "Let's drink to that." We clinked our glasses and both of us took a long sip each, finishing them to the bottom. I know you wanted to avoid the crowds, but I'd really like to show you my city. We could have fun there, you know? I think I'd like that. Maybe sometime soon? I really thought it would be fun, but I had my doubts because of our age and grade difference. She was still much taller than me. Maybe I should stop worrying about that and just have fun. We both got up to refill our glasses. It was a very enjoyable conversation, and I looked forward to seeing her again if the opportunity presented itself. It turned out that I would have plenty of them. Later that day, Howard announced that we were going to spend the night in this cove and head back to port the next day. Tanya's group wanted to visit one of the few tiny uninhabited islands in this chain and spend a few nights camping on the beach. Of course, Howard had asked me to fly out with them, and who was I to refuse? The only stipulation was that Maddie and Sarah be invited, and Tanya nearly gave me a bruise when she slapped my arm for suggesting that she wasn't going to invite her. At least she giggled when she did it. I was liking that giggle more and more. That night we all sat in the main cabin and tried to play a drinking game of sorts. We turned on the movie Super Trooper, and the idea was that every time someone said Farva's name, we all had to take a shot. We somehow made it to the end of the movie, but only by some miracle did no one accidentally fall overboard. We all went below deck to our bunks and promptly passed out. There were some moans coming from a few cabins, but I had no idea whose, and I didn't care. I fell asleep quickly and woke up to the sound of waves. I got up and was the second one still awake. I found that Diane was already up and was in the galley waiting for the coffee to brew. I sat down next to her and waited as well. She didn't look like she'd had too much to drink the night before, or managed to fake it somehow. Either way, she was pretty, like the girl next door. "So, Mr. Holmes, are you going to fly with us today?" I hope you're sober enough for that. Her tone was abrupt and completely unexpected. May I call you Diana? I asked politely, and she nodded. I never drink and fly. It's one of my perversions, and I would never risk my life or the lives of my passengers. So you live here like a bum? The harsh tone again. I must have pissed her off in another life or something. Look, I don't know what I've done to offend you, but please don't mistake my comfort for laziness. I had my own business in Virginia, and it was very profitable. Thanks to my ex breaking my heart, I moved here to start over. I still have my business, but now I do it at a more reasonable pace. I don't need you to come here and tell me how to live my life. I got really pissed off, got up, poured a mug of coffee, and went out on the deck. How dare she come at me like that, accusing me of being a drunken bum? I sat down in the captain's chair and looked out over the water. There were no other ships in sight, and only one commercial airliner flying high, probably at 37,000 feet or so. The lonely silence was as peaceful as it always was. Excuse me, came barely audibly from behind me. I turned around in my chair and Diana stood there with a confused look. I was being rude, and you didn't deserve that. I saw you talking to Tanya yesterday, and I was just afraid you were just another jerk trying to get close to her and her money. And I thought about it for a moment and realized that she was acting like a good friend should. Hakuna Matata. It's not a big deal, Diana. You're just a good friend, and I appreciate that. Honestly, it felt really good to sit and talk to her. I haven't done that with anyone in a long time. I'm not going to try to swindle money out of her. Thank you. Sometimes I feel like I have to look out for her because no one else will. She doesn't have the best sniff for losers and scam artists. I smiled at her. So what do you do when you're not socializing with your superstar friend? I chuckled to soften the question. She joined my giggle before answering. Actually, my husband and I are both doctors. He does sports medicine, he's an orthopedic surgeon, and I work in obstetrics. We were friends as kids and all through high school. Tanya went to college at some art school in the Northeast, and I went to medical school at the University of Madison. Tanya and I grew up together, but we lost touch after high school. We both knew what we were going to college for, but time and distance separated us. By pure coincidence, we met again in Los Angeles, at a fundraiser for children with cancer. We immediately renewed our friendship and have been close ever since. Wow, I'm jealous. That sounds idyllic. My best friend Todd lives very far away. I haven't seen him in about 8 years. Sean is a great friend, and he's rapidly on his way to taking his place, but I still miss the good times I had with Todd. Oh well, Hakuna Matata. What's that? Did you just quote Disney? She laughed in satisfaction at my expense. Yes, I did. Ever since I got here, I decided I wasn't going to let things master me, so I started repeating that phrase in my head. It actually applies quite often. She smiled, but she wasn't openly laughing at me anymore. Oh well, it's a happy thought anyway, right? Well, again, I apologize for the rudeness, and I look forward to chatting with you further. She stood up and paused. You know Tanya likes you, right? I mean, she likes you. I could tell by the way she acted around you last night. I didn't expect to hear that. I mean, she was great, but totally not my type. She was gorgeous, not to mention so famous that even the dolphins knew who she was. I think the look on my face told Diana how crazy I thought that was. Trust me, she likes you. Honestly, all this movie star and fame stuff aside, she's a woman like any other. And you, James, are a mystery. She's attracted to your mystery, I think. And the fact that you're very handsome. Anyway, get to know her better, and you never know where it might lead. Just don't hurt her, or you'll have to deal with me. She finished with a smirk and made her way down to the main deck. It was definitely an interesting conversation. By this time, I had heard others talking below and decided to head down from the upper deck to get ready for the day. I met pretty much everyone except Howard and Sean. I guess those two have the same sleep cycle, as they were always sleeping off after their night out. Tanya smiled as I walked by and I turned to the group. Everyone ready for a fun time? Everyone nodded their heads. We're going to fly to the small island like you asked and camp on the beach. Once we get back to the dock, be ready to depart about an hour after that. I pulled up the anchor and started the big yacht's turbo diesel, bringing the throttle to half throttle. The yacht roared forward as the propellers started spinning faster. I turned the yacht around and we sailed back toward our home port. After about 20 minutes, Sean finally came up on deck and nodded to me without a smile. I sympathized with him. He must have been trying to get into another drinking contest with Howard. Always a mistake, always. The man had more experience than most of us. I shook my head and continued on my way. Another half hour passed, and Howard finally came up into the world of the living. He looked like hell. There was no way to sugarcoat it, but at least he had a smile that contrasted oddly with the rest of his disheveled appearance. He walked over to the wheel where I was and just stood next to me. "Well, how are you feeling, Howard? To be honest, you don't look too good." "I've been better. How long till we get to the harbor?" "Another 40 minutes or so. I've already told the rest of the group that as soon as we dock, have them pack up and meet me at the airplane in an hour. I have to do a pre-flight and also get all my supplies ready for the trip." "Okay," he hummed and headed for the galley. All in all, the night on the water went great, and the next few days promised to be just as exciting, if not more so. I couldn't wait to spend more time with Tanya. I hadn't fallen in love since college, and I felt like a teenager again. I just hoped I was enough for someone like her. We made it to the harbor without incident, and everyone split up to get ready for the main event. I ran to my boat to gather the items I needed and carried them to the plane. After stowing my gear, I proceeded with the pre-flight inspection. By this time, Sean was feeling better and helped with the pre-flight inspection. He wasn't going to fly with us, but he wanted to help anyway. 10 minutes before my allotted hour expired, Tanya and her group came down to the dock carrying several bags. I told them that we would be able to fit almost everything, but might have to squeeze in. This elicited grumbles and frowns from both ladies. The guys, however, didn't care and said so. "If we have to lose a couple bags, no big deal," Marcus said. "Yeah, I didn't bring that much with me, so," Michael agreed. Tyrone came to the girls' rescue. "We're not going to throw all this stuff away. We'll just have to make them fit." Tanya was silent for most of the dialogue, only nodding her head at the last statement and then bursting into laughter. Everyone joined her, and soon some of those who were laughing so hard had tears flowing. The laughter subsided and everyone boarded the plane. The luggage fit with plenty of room to spare. We took off without incident and made it to our chosen island. The landing was a little rough, but only because the surf around this island was rougher than I expected. But we went down anyway and got the airplane safely to shore. I pulled the rope up to tie it to the thickest tree I could find. We set up camp on the shore as planned. We made a fire ring out of rocks and set up all of our little tents. There were a total of 8 of us and 4 tents. We also set up a canopy for the meal, putting a stove and Tupperware container dishes on it. When everything was ready, we all gathered in the eating area. I spoke like a pseudo-guide. "So, listen up. You're all adults here, but I strongly recommend that no one go out alone. Besides, see those wooded areas behind us? You can go in there, but don't wander too far. It will be very difficult to find anyone there, especially after dark." After this informal safety briefing, we went our separate ways. I set up my folding chair on the bank and sat back to relax. All I needed was a beach pineapple and I was ready. My paradise was interrupted by a shadow that passed between me and the sun. "Do you always just sit idle or do you ever walk around these beautiful islands?" I looked up and there stood Tanya, putting her hands on her hips. "Sometimes, I guess, depending on the company." "Why? Would you like to go for a walk?" She bit her lower lip again. So adorable. "Yes, that would be very nice." So I got up and walked her down to the beach. Any idiot would have agreed, but I really enjoyed being around her. I didn't even think about the fact that she was probably about 10 years younger than me. We walked barefoot, not really caring about time. The tide was starting to come in again, and soon our feet were wet. We turned back toward the campground as it got wetter with each wave. As we walked back, she slipped her hand into mine and we intertwined our fingers. I glanced at her, not sure what was going on. Her answering smile could have lit up the entire beach, but it spoke volumes about how she felt in that moment. Honestly, I swam back to camp. I even vaguely remember getting there to find Marcus and Tyrone already preparing dinner for the group. Diane and Michael were walking back toward camp, carrying armfuls of firewood. They set the load on a neat pile that was already there and both moved to sit down. We all ate and joked about the day's events. I tossed some wood chips into the makeshift fire and built up a nice flame. As dusk turned to night, we all sat around the fire and started telling stories. It seemed like I had always been a part of this group of friends, and it was wonderful. All too soon it was time to pack up for the night. I let the embers finish burning and headed toward one of the tents. Diane and her husband had already zipped up the doors to their tent. Tyrone and his husband had just opened their tent door and were climbing in. Madison and Sarah hid in their tent, while I contemplated saying goodnight to them. All that was left was for me and Tanya to share the fourth tent. I hadn't thought about it before, but now that we were standing at the flap, I was a little nervous. Here I was, a grown man, nervous as if this was my first time at prom. And that was assuming something would happen between us, which I really hoped it would. I unzipped, opened the flap so she could get inside, and then sat down behind her. I zipped up and called out to the rest of the group, "Good night, everyone." A chorus of voices erupted in response. "Good night." Eventually, we got down to it. As I fell asleep, I thought about how lucky I was to have this beauty sleeping with me, in a tent, on the beach, in paradise. The next few days went the same way. Tanya and I snuck into the tent as often as we could. Her friends kept berating us for it, but we didn't care. We enjoyed every moment we could be alone together. When it was time to pack up and make the return trip, neither of us wanted it to end. If not love, then at least I had definitely fallen in love with this woman. She made me feel so alive again, I didn't want it to end. But unfortunately, it had to. She had to go back to LA for a new picture she was going to shoot, and I had a lot more touring to do. When it came time to see them off to the airport, we were both a little emotional. "James, I don't know what happened this week, but I felt something with you. I really wish you could come with me." I know, I felt it too, whatever it was. "Tanya, I can't leave yet, but I'll be sure to come see you in LA soon. How about I come over in 2 weeks and spend a week with you? You show me your apartment and we can walk around the city." "Sounds good, aside from the waiting." She smiled and continued. "Promise me you'll come." "I promise I'll come visit you in California and we'll keep melting sheets." I winked, giving her permission to start laughing, which she did. "Here's my home number and cell number. The printed number on the front is my agent Tyrone's number. You can call him if you can't reach me, okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. I gave her my card so she could have my numbers too. We hugged gently, kissed goodbye, and waved goodbye as they went through security and up the ramp to the plane. I stood and watched the plane pull away from the gate, then turned around and headed back to my daughter. As her plane took off, I seriously wondered if I would ever see her again. Upon reflection, I made her a promise, and I had every intention of keeping it. Maddie stood with Sarah, whispering conspiratorially amongst themselves, and quickly fell silent as I approached. It felt good to spend time with my daughter, to see her happy again. I knew that the problems between Caitlin and me must have bothered her a lot, so I was glad she hadn't fallen into a deep depression or something. She deserved to be happy, and I was doing my best to contribute to that. "Okay, Maddie, are you ready to go back to school?" "God, I loved having you here, honey." I gasped and couldn't say anything else. She understood. "Daddy, I love you too." She moved into my arms and we hugged tightly. I waved for Sarah to join the group hug and we just hugged. When we let go of each other, the girls looked at each other and just giggled. "Daddy, you're really in love with Tanya, aren't you?" Sarah asked. "Yeah, I think so," I replied simply. "You should call her tomorrow and tell her you're thinking about her." "We girls love that sort of thing," Sarah added. "Understood, and thank you. To both of you. Thank you for coming to visit me, and I love you both. Are you planning on making it official? Is Sarah going to be officially my daughter-in-law soon?" Sarah just smirked, and Maddie blushed. We hugged one last time, and I made Maddie promise to call me as soon as they landed. I waited for them to get on the plane, and my heart squeezed when I saw the plane pull away from the building and taxi out onto the runway. All my girls disappeared again. As soon as it was in the air, I went back to my airplane and got it ready to fly back to the marina. Everything was fine, and the fuel gauge was still showing A34, which was more than enough to fly to my dock. I started it up and pulled onto the runway. After getting permission from the tower to take off, I pushed the throttle all the way down and the old bird picked up speed and got off the ground. I never get tired of doing that. The return flight was going normally, not a cloud in the sky, when I heard a loud pop from the nose of the airplane. After a minute of nothing happening, I relaxed again. About 10 minutes later, I heard another loud pop and immediately mentally checked what I needed to do. I checked my sensors and everything seemed to be fine. The next pop caught me off guard, but startled me enough that I slammed my fist on the dashboard. As I hit the dashboard, one of my gauges changed and reported that I had very low engine oil pressure. This was bad news. How the hell could the oil pressure drop that low? I radioed my coordinates and asked for help. I realized I probably wouldn't make it to the airport, but I had to try before I crashed. The dispatcher reported that I was about 10 minutes from a dirt strip on an island nearby, and I started looking for it. The engine started to choke and I began to panic. I had a lot of flying experience, but never had an accident. I hoped that this would continue to be the case, but it was beginning to look like it wouldn't last long. Smoke billowed from the right side of the engine and I felt the power leaving my bird. As it slowed down, I carefully let the nose dip slightly and dropped altitude to conserve lift. As I continued to descend, I saw a small island directly in front of me. I radioed the last known coordinates and began to prepare for an emergency landing. As I approached the island, I realized it was uninhabited and had no ground strip. The beard banked and the divey became steeper. I pulled as much leverage as I could and tried to target the bay on one side of the island. If I managed to land the airplane, regardless of the condition of the engine, it would be easier to see than some pattern in the sand. The altimeter was my enemy. It was showing 300 feet and descending ever faster. 200. 50. 100. I leveled it as best I could with the rocks and waves around me and felt it hit the water, harder than ever before. I felt the airplane bounce off the water and hit it again, and my head slammed into the instrument panel. That was the last thing I remember before blackness descended upon me. Next chapter. When I was about 31 years old, after 10 years of marriage, my parents were tragically taken from me. Even more tragic, it wasn't the fault of a drunk driver or a truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel. I wish it had been so merciful to them. But not my poor parents. They were driving home during a thunderstorm and the rain turned into a downpour. My dad didn't even notice it. The car's brakes failed, so the cops said, and they drove through the barrier and fell into the river. There was so much water rushing down it that the car was immediately swept away. The car was carried down the river and finally got stuck on a rock in the middle of the river, almost a quarter of a mile from where the road was. The police told us that the cause of death was drowning. I can't imagine a more horrible way to die. To know you're running out of air and you're going to die. I still have nightmares sometimes, though not as often as I used to. I dream that I'm with them, in the back seat. The car goes off the road, catapults into the river and dangles like a cork until we go underwater. The water flows around the car so fast that we can't open any of the doors. One of the windows breaks and water pours inside, filling the entire space. It is usually at this point that I wake up. Caitlin would often comfort me in the middle of the night, hugging me tightly and whispering in my ear that everything would be okay. Thankfully, I haven't had this nightmare in a very long time. Imagine my shock when I woke up abruptly in pitch darkness after having that horrible nightmare again. This time it was different. This time Caitlin and I were in the front seat and Maddie was in the back seat. My heart was pounding at a mile a minute and I was sweating profusely. I looked around and could barely see my hands in front of my face, though I could feel the glass on my knees and the floor crunching under my shoes. I couldn't make out anything else due to the absence of the moon and the total darkness caused by the complete lack of light around me. I shook my head and it started pounding hard. It was a mistake, but after the spots disappeared, my vision cleared up a bit. I unbuckled my belt and thankfully, I didn't feel much pain. Now I wish I had bought a newer airplane. This old one clearly lacked some of the modern safety features that the new ones had. I looked around my seat and found what I was looking for on the floor. My flashlight. I unclipped it and turned it on. Instantly, I went blind, but it passed quickly. I looked around me for the first time since I crashed. I had no idea how bad the damage was, but the pontoons of this bird had hit the water hard. My legs hurt a little and I had a massive headache. I touched my head but couldn't feel a wet spot from the blood, just a huge knot on my forehead. Pointing the flashlight at my legs and arms, I saw a few small scratches, but nothing serious. After standing and feeling the airplane shift a little, I began to move more slowly. I didn't yet know how seriously injured I was, so I had to be very careful. I pointed the light outside and I could see palm trees to my right and the beach beyond the front windows. To my left, I could see the reflection of the water, which meant the plane must have reached the shore and lodged sideways in the sand. That was good. I could stay in the sea for a long time, rocking on the waves and hoping that the airplane would not sink. Looking toward the engine, I saw no sign of smoke or fire, so whatever damage to it had been done was done. I felt the airplane swaying slightly again and decided that one of the pontoons must still be in the water. Need to secure it before the tide caught up or carried my bird away. I walked over to the right side door and looked at the ground below. I saw sand and nothing else. Opening the door, I jumped down and fell straight to the ground in pain. My right leg hurt a lot worse than I thought it would before, and went completely hamstrung when I fell on it. I stood up again and tried to put weight on it. It hurt, but it held up. I thanked God for the small miracle that at least I didn't have any broken bones. But it still stung unbearably. I wouldn't have to jump again anytime soon. Limping, I made my way to one of the rear compartments, retrieved the emergency supplies and rope stored there, and then closed the compartment. I put the emergency kit on the seat in front of me, and then stepped away from the airplane to find something to tie myself to. There appeared to be a palm tree nearby, and I headed toward it. I wrapped the rope around the tree, tying it as tight as I could. I pulled the rest of it back toward the airplane, and I managed to wrap it around the front post of the pontoon enough to tie it there as well. It was a miracle it was long enough. I think I had about 2 feet to spare. Once I was done with that, I felt a complete mix of emotions and began to take stock. I had wrecked God knows how long ago. I was on an island that didn't look inhabited, at least not near the crash site. I was injured, but not seriously. Most likely, without repairs, my airplane would not fly again. I had some emergency water, but that was it. With no food or any sign of people, I realized I could be stuck here alone for a while. I pulled out my cell phone, but naturally it wasn't receiving any signal. I put it into airplane mode to save battery power. Okay, think about it, James, think about it. There it is. The radio. I reported my situation, at least what I thought was my situation, to the dispatcher. The problem, as I now realized, was that this island didn't have a dirt airstrip like they thought, so they might have started their search in the wrong place. I slowly climbed back into the airplane and flicked the radio switch. Unfortunately, the light came on, but went out almost immediately. Either it was broken too, or the battery was dead while I was unconscious. What was I going to do now? I checked my phone again and saw that it was about 3:30 a.m. Deciding that I wouldn't have time to do anything while it was dark outside, I climbed back into the airplane, closed the doors, locked them, and went to bed. In retrospect, if I had been thinking straight, I would have forced myself to stay awake in case I had a concussion. Fortunately, I didn't have one, I found out later, and I was in no real danger. I woke up to the sun rising over the palm trees and birds singing somewhere in the distance. I got out of the airplane to look around, for now I could see. I didn't remember much about my days as a Boy Scout, but I did remember that I could go a couple days without food if I really needed it. The problem was that my body couldn't go without water for nearly as long. My first task was to inventory the supplies on the airplane. I opened both rear compartment doors and found a very light toolbox, my luggage, a rocket launcher, and some extra bungee cords. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get started. The rocket launcher only had one charge, but it would come in very handy if someone flew low enough or brought their boat close enough to shore. I carried the stuff to the edge of the forest to make sure it wouldn't get wet. As I took a short break, a rather large multicolored parrot landed on the branch above me. He was just looking at me and spreading his feathers on his perch. Well, at least I wasn't alone. I walked back to the airplane, climbed into the cockpit and looked around. I lucked out and found that we had stocked up on several bottles of water and the cheap peanuts that the major airlines also serve. The water was good news, but the peanuts by themselves wouldn't last long. Other than the water and snacks, I found nothing else of use in the cabin. I walked back to the tree line, sat in the shade, and contemplated my predicament. How the hell did this happen? Why was I having such bad luck lately? Was it my fault? Had I checked the airplane as thoroughly as I should have before takeoff? Was this problem something Sean should have discovered? I was partying with everyone else, but I didn't drink anything the day my daughter left, so it shouldn't have made a difference. So many questions and no answers yet. Okay, enough thinking. It's time to get down to business, I said to myself. What do I need to do to get rescued? This area is pretty well explored, so I should be spotted by some passing airplane. I just had to find a way to become visible. I had a flare, but it was only enough for one shot. I needed to create some sort of smoke signal that could be seen from afar. Besides, some kind of food had to be found. Maybe I could do like in the movies and catch a fish in a tide pool or something. Damn, am I really putting my life in the hands of a movie? I shook my head and laughed. No matter what, I swore to myself that I wouldn't find a soccer ball and talk to it. That would be too much? Maybe I'll just talk to the parrot. Good God, what was I thinking? I sat in the shadows for a while, wondering how long it would be before a boat or airplane got close enough to see my flash. I did see one huge cargo ship, but it was several miles away and couldn't see my flare. I had to find a way to get a fire going. And then I went to the trees and started picking up anything I could get my hands on. Twigs, branches, large leaves, and even a few large logs from long fallen trees. I gathered it all up, moved it a few feet away from the tree line, and built a large teepee-shaped fire. I would have to find a way to light it, but for now I had what would make a good signal fire. Satisfied with my small success, I sat down in the shade again and took a sip of water. Before I knew it, the bottle was empty. Damn, I really need to be careful and watch my diet. I had no idea how long I'd have to stick around. Maybe I could poke around and find a stash like Jack Sparrow's. Yeah, a good supply of rum right now would be great. Damn. I checked my phone and saw that it was almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon. By this point, I was getting pretty hungry and was looking at the peanuts like they were going to turn into a huge feast. When no such feast ensued, I stood up and looked around. There didn't seem to be anything nearby that was fit to eat, unless I wanted to feed on palm leaves. I hadn't been on the islands long enough for them to seem suitable for food. At least I laughed at my inside joke. Could I use the lessons from the movies and catch some fish? Maybe I should go farther under the trees and look for something there. After some thought and a well-timed rumbling in my stomach, I decided to go to the trees. I walked inland for at least 10 minutes, getting so far away from the beach that I could barely distinguish the sound of the waves. Other than ferns, palms, and occasional flowering plants, I saw nothing resembling fruit. The trees parted, and I emerged into a grassy field. There appeared to be a small pond, and a few berry bushes to the right of it. I ran to the berries and picked a few bunches into my shirt. I wasn't sure if they were edible, but I was going to pick some anyway and hope for the best. After picking them, I looked around the pond. The water looked clean, but not clean enough to drink without any treatment. If I could find a way to boil it, I could probably drink it. Also in the pond were what looked like small fish, each no bigger than a couple inches long. I wondered if I'd have enough of them to eat. I carried the picked berries to the beach and sat down again. I slowly tasted one berry and found it to be slightly sweet, but tasted surprisingly pleasant. After eating a few, I decided that if they made me sick, so be it. The parrot was still sitting nearby watching me. I had had enough of the berries, and there were a few left. I decided to sleep on the airplane again, figuring it would be safer that way. When I woke up the next morning, I heard what sounded like the noise of a helicopter flying nearby. I climbed out of the airplane, grabbed my rocket launcher, and began to survey the sky. I couldn't see anything, but I could still hear it. My ears must have been deceiving me because the sound was getting closer and farther away. After a few agonizing minutes, I heard it fade away until it was no longer audible. Damn it! I yelled into the sky. To say I was disappointed is an understatement. Perhaps I should have lit a signal fire instead of relying on the flare gun. I headed for the tree line and immediately noticed that all the remaining berries I had were either gone or broken, and I had nothing to eat. Damn! I should have been smarter and taken them with me on the plane. Some animal or parrot must have had a feast at my expense. Now I was hungry again, and there were no more berries. I went again to the grassy clearing and to the pond. There were a few berries left there, but not enough to last. I looked at the fish that were swimming around and decided to try fishing with my hands. It actually took a long time. It took me forever to stand there like an idiot, and wait for a single fish to swim up to me. What the hell was I thinking? That the fish itself would swim into my hands and let me pick it up out of the water? My judgment skills were obviously still lacking, and it forced my mind back to the events of the past few years. Perhaps if I had retired earlier, none of this would have happened. We often talked about retiring early and just going traveling. I took a deep breath, thinking about a future that was no longer there. Eventually, the fish was apparently foolish enough to approach me, and I grabbed it. She resisted, but eventually I slammed her head hard against my knee a couple times, and she stopped moving. I had seen this in a movie and figured it would work. Now all that was left was to figure out how to start a fire. I didn't smoke, or I would have had a lighter with me. I wondered if there was anything in the airplane that I could use. If there was any battery power left, maybe I could jumper wires or something to create a spark. The chances were slim, but what else could I do? And I could always go old school and try rubbing my wand against a rock. Hell, they taught us that in the Scouts, but I think they had pre-made sticks there that were perfect for making fire. You can't buy those here. I had a good laugh at my own joke, but it was short-lived. First, I made a small ring of stones and put some more small brushwood and twigs inside. Deciding that the battery path would work more likely, I found a stick and ripped off a piece of shirt to wrap around the end of it. I took the positive wire off the terminal and hit the negative with it. I was happy that it gave a spark. I held the improvised shirt on soldering iron up to the battery, and after a few sparks it crackled. I blew on it to get it to fire better, and again was pleased with my success. I threw it into a smaller fire and watched it flare up and grow. I poked the top of my little fish with a stick and pulled it with my hands. It turned out dirty, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get it clean enough to cook. Once I cleaned it as well as I could without resorting to a filleting knife, I pierced the fish again and put it on the fire to cook. While waiting, I looked again at the sky and water. I saw a few commercial airplanes flying at extreme altitude, but nothing closer. Oddly enough, I saw several large cargo ships, very far away, but nothing close enough. I didn't want to waste a signal fire. God, this was boring. There was nothing left to do but survive. I finished my second bottle of water and ate the small fish I had already prepared. It didn't fill me up like a steak, but it was good enough. I had to eat slowly to avoid the bones and scales. After finishing my meal, I sat by the fire until it burned down to embers. The embers kept me warm for a while, but eventually cooled down, and I decided to give up on the night and went back to sleep on the plane. I was awakened by a loud crackling noise. The airplane was rocking violently, rain pounding on the wings and windows, some getting in through the broken one. It was still dark outside. The light of the rising sun was hidden behind a multitude of thunderclouds. Hell, a thunderstorm was the last thing I needed right now. I stayed on the airplane and waited out the storm. Thankfully, it slowed down and eventually stopped after an hour or two. I was already tired as hell and the sun was out, so sleep wasn't likely to come for a while yet. I climbed down from the plane and checked my signal fire pile. The wood was soaked with moisture, and I could only hope the sun would dry it out quickly. Wet wood could work in my favor as it would burn with more smoke. I learned this from my own experience years ago when the three of us went camping. The day was wasted, so I ate a few peanuts, drank half a bottle of water, and stayed in my little campground. The parrot kept me company, but only to look at me with a mocking look, as if to say, "You're not going to make it." I had no particular hatred for the bird, but every now and then I wanted to throw a rock at it, just for being here. No boats approached my island, and I heard only one airplane flying low enough to get my attention. I prepared a flare but never saw the plane. It must have been on the other side of the island, and that pissed me off. "Why the hell haven't you found me yet?" I shouted, shaking my fist at the sky. When no one answered me, I sank back down to the sand. I wasn't crying, but I really wanted to cry. This wasn't how I had envisioned my last days. I know I wanted to be away from my old life, but not to this extent. I ended the day with leftover peanuts and a bottle of water. The next day, I tried to run the wires from the battery directly to the radio, but the radio wires were pretty short. I had to take the battery out, and I finally connected it directly to the radio. It turned on, and I immediately started calling the SOS on the radio for help. I didn't know how much time I had, so I didn't wait long for a response. I tried to report what had happened and where I was flying when I fell. I started hearing haphazard responses, and then the battery quickly ran out. The radio was dead, and I could only hope that my message reached someone who could find me in time. I was mad at myself for not thinking of doing this 2 days ago. Damn! I yelled again, not paying attention to anyone. Maybe I really should look for a soccer ball. The parrot wasn't exactly helping me in that endeavor. Yone. I spent the rest of the day looking for berries and found another bush near the clearing I had discovered earlier. I tried to pull another fish out of the pond, but was unsuccessful. The berries were delicious, and I ended up eating them all, still feeling hungry afterward. In the evening, I drank half a bottle of water and sat down on the bank again. I must have fallen asleep on the beach because I woke up to the cold air on my face. The warm glow of sunrise showed from behind the mountain on my island. I only had half a bottle of water left, and now I had peanuts and berries too. The waves gave me an idea. I looked down the beach but didn't see what I was looking for. I walked along the beach for at least a mile, rounded a bend, and bam, found exactly what I wanted to find. A tide pool. There, on top of the mini pond, was a tide pool that was at least a foot or two deep in the center. I was hoping to catch something in it, as I was now in danger of literally starving to death. I stood in the water about waist deep and hoped that I might be able to catch a fish. I stood there for what seemed like an eternity, but saw nothing moving that I could grab onto. I climbed out and went to the ocean water, wondering if there was anything there that I could catch. I swam out to chest-deep water, but I could still see the bottom clearly. I could see fish swimming, but they were moving pretty fast. I wasn't too sure of my plan at this point, but stayed with it a little longer. Eventually, I saw a fish about 2 feet long that was slowly swimming next to my feet. Without moving my feet, I turned and reached down to try to quickly grab it. I got a good grip on her and thought I might be able to swim out. The problem was that there were 2 predators after this fish today. Before I realized what had happened, a dark gray blur swam in front of my face and bit into the fish right between my hands. Another inch to either side, and I could have lost one of my arms. The fish was snatched up by a shark probably 4 or 5 feet long, with its fin proudly sticking out of the water. I immediately froze, letting her take her catch, and slowly backed up until I felt I was in deep enough water that she wouldn't chase me. Apogee. I had never seen sharks in person, only on Discovery Channel shows. Up close and personal, I realized I never want to mess with sharks again. I walked back to dry land and plopped on my butt. I was still worked up, but now I realized I had another problem. The bastard had taken my dinner and now I would have to starve again. Damn. Having no choice, I walked back to the crash site. I was tired as hell. My mouth was dry as a desert and my stomach wouldn't stop rumbling. I was in real shit and had no idea what to do. My movie training was coming to an end. I sat and waited. I didn't realize what I was waiting for anymore, but I guess that was all I could do. Maybe I was just waiting to die. And the damn parrot was still sitting there, taunting me. This time it even made some kind of sound, a loud quacking sound, and tilted its head to the side. I didn't care anymore. My eyelids became very heavy and I climbed back into the airplane and fell soundly asleep. I woke up with the sunrise and realized it was going to be another beautiful day. It was just a shame that now, without water and food, my day would be miserable. I sat down and just sat on the shore. At the lowest point in my life, I thought, would I be able to kill myself with a rocket launcher? Not likely. Would I swim out and let the sharks grab me? No, that would probably hurt like hell before dying. It's a funny thing to think about how you're going to die. Most people just think they'll die of old age, go to sleep and never wake up. I always thought that's exactly what I would do. As I sat there contemplating my death, I suddenly heard it. The faint rumble of an approaching airplane. It wasn't very close yet, but I could tell it was heading in my direction. I jumped to my feet and, without thinking long, fired a flare gun at my signal pile. The flare was mostly just light and smoke, but it was actually a flame source as well, so it lit up the pile. I stood there like an idiot and tried to fan the fire with my hands to get it going faster. Pretty soon everything was going up in flames. I moved away from the heat and just prayed that the approaching airplane would see the smoke. At the last minute, I took a stick and wrote the word "help" in the sand. It took forever and I finally saw it. What a beautiful sight. The airplane was whizzing over the mountains, heading down towards where I was. It flew over them and made another circle. It slowed down and I jumped for joy. Of course, the plane couldn't land to pick me up, but as it flew by, they tossed me a box. In it was some water and a blanket. I sat down, drank the water, and waited to be picked up. After a few hours, a boat finally picked me up, and I have never been so happy to see anyone in my life. Thank God for the Coast Guard. Thank God you guys showed up. Thank you so much, I told them. They brushed it off, saying they were just doing their job. But I thanked them anyway. I was examined by a medic on the ship, and when they returned to their post, escorted me to the base clinic. I was told to rest and drink lots of water, but otherwise I didn't feel any worse. I waited there and was told that one of my friends was on his way to get me, and I must have fallen asleep while I waited because the sun was already setting, and I woke up to see Sean standing next to my bed. He smiled when he saw that I was awake. Sean, it's good to see you. James, I'm just glad you're okay. We were really worried when you didn't come back. Then we heard a rumor that you radioed for help after the crash. Some fishing boat got your message and relayed it to the Coast Guard. Thank goodness. Let's go home, I said. We left and he drove me back to Molokai. As we walked down the dock to my boat, I saw a woman standing next to it. Caitlin. What the hell is she doing here? That's what I said. Sean, what the hell is she doing here? She showed up after Maddie called. I don't know why she's here, but it might be helpful for you to get a handle on the situation. I really didn't want to see her again, but he was right. I needed to get at least some answers from that cheating bitch. I wasn't going to make this easy, plus I had just gotten back from the island where I had been for almost a week. I had a lot of patience. Caitlin, why are you here? James, please. I know I'm probably the last person you wanted to see, but I had to come. Maddie called me and I got on the first plane that came. Why did you have to come? Did you want to rub my nose in your damn Cyrus one more time? I replied with venom. The anger I'd brushed aside was quickly boiling over again. There were already tears in her eyes, but I wasn't about to give up. Caitlin, I came here to try and forget you. It won't work, but I tried. I've done nothing. Nothing to deserve what you did to me. I've only loved you my whole life. I know, she wailed. Please, if you cared about me, just hear me out. She wheezed, but got her tears under control. Okay. I might be able to calm down a little and get rid of her, for good this time. I'll listen to whatever you have to say, but then I want you to leave. She nodded, and I led her back down the dock to a gazebo where we could sit. I sat down across from her, waiting to see what she would say. The anger had subsided a little, but I was still unhappy with this turn of events. In fact, I just wanted to go back and rest. First of all, I'm really sorry for what I did. I know it doesn't mean much now, but I still love you. I snorted and then replied, but not enough, right? I know I messed up and I'll always regret it. I'm just going to tell you everything and hope that someday you can forgive me. I waved my hand for her to continue. Cyrus started hitting on me a few months ago, right around the time you were contracted to deliver supplies for those unfortunate Oklahoma tornado victims. At first, it was just flirting, which I was used to by now. He came by every time you flew out and stayed the night. I'm not sure, but I think that's when he started to sow doubts in you. He'd say things like, "Has James called you yet? I wonder if he walks around the bars when he's out." And things like that. And you fell for that crap? Have I ever given you any reason to think I'm screwing with you? Honestly, no. But the way he kept doing it made me think you might be. I used to banter with you when you were away, and your answers always sounded like a joke. After everything Cyrus told me, I started to have doubts. I know I should have just asked you. Okay, but that still doesn't answer the question of why you started doing it with him. She wrinkled her nose and shook her head, but continued. I know. One night when you weren't home, he came over. After we had a glass of wine each, he asked if I'd heard from you. I told him I hadn't, so I called you. Do you remember the night I called you and I think you were at a bar or something? Yeah, I was at the Hooters restaurant eating a late dinner. It was pretty loud in there. What, did you think I was in a bar looking for someone to have fun with? Not at first, but I heard women talking in the background and then you said you had to go. When we hung up, Cyrus said you like to sit around and have a drink with younger women when you're not home. He said he'd been with you a few times. I was furious when I thought about it. It added to my anger that your job keeps pulling you away from me. I started to get angry again. This woman always had a way of pissing me off. I'm sorry for everything. She paused, seemingly mulling over her next words. That night, he snuggled up to me and was very comforting. I told myself that I needed attention, and that if you could get it elsewhere, so could I. That first night I was thinking about you, actually. While he was, well, while he was doing me, I was thinking about you. It was good, but it was nowhere near the love that you and I had. Anyway, after that night, he came over whenever you were away. I don't know why I kept coming back, but we also met at his house a few times when you were home. I shook my head. How could I have been so blind to all of this? She had been cheating on me for a long time. I'd had my suspicions after I'd found out he'd returned after I'd left town. But the brutal truth hurt more than I wanted to admit. The night you were out with those government guys, Cyrus came over and showed me those pictures. Up until that point, I'd been mad at you for what I thought you were doing. But those pictures made me so angry that I decided it was time to really punish you. God, how stupid I was. If I'd looked at them closer, it wouldn't have made any difference, would it? You'd already crossed the line by then. I can't believe I didn't notice it. You were a very good actress. I never meant to hurt you until that night. When he told me you were out with that guy and his two scrappy assistants, I lost my temper. I told him I wanted you to pay. I wanted to show you what it felt like to have your heart trampled on. I'm not saying it was the right thing to do. It's just what I thought at the time. Yeah? Well, mission accomplished. You almost killed me that night and also destroyed my love for you. I still remember all the good times we had, but I can never go back. James, I thought you were cheating on me. I don't give a damn. You should have told me about it. You should have at least shown some decency before you went to bed with that snake and tried your hardest to screw me. Did you know he was going to try to kill me? And why the hell didn't you call the police? I would have, but when I got back to the house, it was already cleaned up. Her tears came again. Good. She needs to know how much she hurt me. James, she wheezed between words. I know. I left. A great man. For a snake. Oh my God. She put her head down on the table, on her hands, and just sobbed. This was her show, so I just waited for her to calm down. Sitting up, I heard pops. I turned to my left, and there stood Cyrus. What the hell? Talk about a day out of the Twilight Zone. I immediately jumped up to meet his gaze. I was going to walk up to him and do my best Mike Tyson impersonation. I took 2 steps, and he pulled a gun on me. Seriously? Again? Damn, Cyrus, what the hell did I do to you? I thought we were friends, but apparently I was sorely mistaken. This is the second time you've pulled a goddamn gun on me. He pointed the gun at me. It looked a lot bigger than the last one. I was under no illusions that I'd be lucky this time, and the bullet would stop without entering my body. James, you poor bastard. You really have no clue about anything, do you? I just stared at him, not sure what he was talking about. I made my confusion clear. What the hell are you talking about? He hummed, smiled, and looked pleased with himself. Luckily, I have a few good friends, and Sean appeared beside him. He put the gun to Cyrus's head and told him to lower his weapon. Sorry I'm late. I saw that asshole sneaking up on you guys and thought something like that was going to happen. Cyrus growled, but did as he was told. He turned to me again, and with a look full of disdain, he stunned me with his next words. Right? My mother was having an affair and my father found out about it. Want to guess who was the lucky guy? Timothy Holmes. If my face reflected even a tenth of the shock I felt, that would have been enough. Yeah, your good old dad used to entertain my mom. You always wanted to know why they got divorced, right? Well, now you know. I didn't find out right away, but when I did, I planned my revenge on you all. Wait, are you telling me that because my dad was an asshole and entertained your mom, I deserved whatever shit you gave me? I thought you were my friend, asshole. He just looked at me with obvious hatred in his eyes. I couldn't bear to see you so happy. Your parents were still together and you had your nice family. And I was miserable. My parents never talk to each other, and when they do, they fight. I will never forgive your family. I took revenge on your parents, and now I'm taking revenge on you. His words made my stomach ache. Had he really just admitted that he was involved in my parents' accident? What did you just say? I growled. Cyrus had an angry look on his face, like he enjoyed telling us all his dirty secrets. his dark plans. You heard me. I messed up their car that night. The storm wasn't planned, but in the end it didn't matter. I can't believe I let that happen, Caitlin muttered, shaking her head. Tears were rolling down her ruddy cheeks, and it looked like she was about to lose the last of her food. I'm done with this shit. I'm calling the police and you're going to jail, Cyrus, I yelled at him. I reached into my pocket for my phone and Cyrus raised his gun again, and then there was a loud bang. My ears rang like I had just come back from a rock concert, but when I looked in front of me, Cyrus was lying on the ground with blood pouring out of a hole in the side of his head. I looked up at Sean and nodded in acknowledgement. I must have had a ton of adrenaline flowing through my veins because I was on edge. I kicked his corpse in the groin. It was my only outlet for all the anger I felt. As my rage slowly dissipated, I slumped down on the bench next to Caitlin. It's finally over, I said. I think now would be a good time to call the police, don't you? Both nodded in agreement, and I made the call. I explained the situation and they quickly arrived on the scene. It's not every day a shooting happens on this island. They took our statements and surveyed the scene. Caitlin and I didn't have to wait to be questioned, and we walked back to my boat on the dock. The cops told us not to go too far away until they finished their investigation. I had no doubt that they would find Cyrus. My biggest worry was whether or not Sean would face any charges. We walked down to the deck, and I offered my ex-wife a drink. So where does that leave us? Caitlin asked. To be better parents to our daughter. Other than that, there is no more USA, Kate. I'm sorry, but there's too much water under that bridge now. She nodded slightly with moist eyes. You're right, of course. I could have prevented all of this, but I'll have to live with my decisions. I still regret everything and wish we could rewind and do it all over again. I know, but that's never going to happen. Kate, for that matter, I forgive you. Thanks. That's probably more than I deserve. There was nothing more to say to each other. I told her she could sleep in one of the available bunks and wished her a good life as she left in the morning. I was just glad to be home, and also very relieved that Cyrus wouldn't be following me around anymore. The conversation with Caitlin, while brutally painful, also helped fill in some gaps. It didn't make me feel any better, but it seemed like the problems between us were over. After she left in a cab, I got a call from my daughter. She was clearly concerned about my health and was asking me questions at a mile a minute. What's wrong? Are you okay? Mom called. Is she okay too? She said she was on her way to see you. Is she there? Is she okay? Calm down, honey. Everything's fine now. I was rescued after my plane crashed. Your mom is on her way back to Virginia, and I'm okay. A light sob was heard on the other end. Honey, are you okay? Yes, Daddy. Just really glad you're safe. Your friend Sean called me and told me you were missing. I was really worried, and Mom asked why. I had to tell her, I'm sorry, Dad. It's okay, Maddie. I'm actually glad she came out. We finally got to talk about everything we've been waiting to talk about for so long. Yeah? How did it go? She asked, seemingly overly hopeful to me. I tried to gently reassure her. Honey, we were able to talk about everything, but that doesn't change what happened. We're both going to be there for you no matter what, and that was the best outcome. We have to be there for each other when you need us to be, okay? Okay, I guess I was just hoping things could have turned out differently, that's all. I know. I took a deep breath and sighed. Maddie, I want you to realize something. I loved your mom more than anything in the world, and you were a very close second. She loved me too, but it wasn't enough for her. I can't change that. Don't make the same mistakes we did. Make sure you always have an open line of communication with the one you love, even if it's something painful. The only other thing I can say is no matter what, always stick to your promises. I do my best to always keep my promises because that's what I expect others to do. You know, it's just the old golden rule. I know. I heard her sniffle again, so I decided to change course. Okay, enough about me. How's school going? How's Sarah doing? She laughed for a full minute. That's my dad. He just got back from his accident and wants to know about my school and personal life. Priceless. I giggled along with her. I will always be interested in how you're doing. It's a professional obligation as a parent. But you never answered my questions, did you? I inquired. School's fine, Dad. We've just started the semester, so we're still doing a lot of boring stuff. Sarah's doing well too. We're living together now, in the same apartment near campus. Okay, call me if you need anything. I'll be under house arrest for a while until either my plane is fixed or I get another one. Stay safe. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Maddie. With those words, we disconnected. I sighed, very deeply, and sat down at the galley table. This was the second hardest week of my life. Sure, we'd had many ups and downs during our marriage, but nothing like this year. I quickly poured myself a drink, drank it, and went to pass out on my bed. The next day, I called the police department to ask about Sean, who had apparently spent the night in jail. They couldn't tell me anything, but said he would probably be charged or released that same day. It turned out that the Maui County DA decided not to charge him, citing that everything completely matched the witness's self-defense testimony. Sean and I decided to celebrate the night of his return with another visit to the tiki hut on the beach and stumbling back to the boat. A week after his release, I asked the service to recover my airplane and bring it back to our dock. Sean said he could repair most of the damage, but I would need to order a new window and some engine parts. I ordered the parts, stayed out of his way, and let him do his thing. Howard came over and we spent a few evenings together over cards and drinks. He asked how I was doing and noted that Tanya had been asking about me. She had tried to call me when I was marauding, but he didn't know where I was then. He suggested I call her. I'd be an idiot if I didn't call her, so of course I did it right away. She was immediately relieved that I was okay and begged me to come and see her in Los Angeles. After a brief but very happy conversation, we disconnected. I spent the rest of the day getting ready to fly to LA and booking a hotel at the airport just in case. I was hoping she would host me while I was there. Sean told me that he would have the plane fixed by the time I got back and that he and Tammy should get our business back up and running. I told them to make sure the plane was not only ready to go, but fully staffed for emergencies. I wasn't going to be stuck in a situation like this again without preparing properly. They both dropped me off at the Honolulu airport and then took me to the island in my own boat. I thought it was funny, but I trusted them completely without question. I spent about an hour on deck chatting with April, Tammy's daughter. She was very inquisitive, and I told her that she should visit her mom at work more often. This elicited a smile and a wiggle of the finger from Tammy, who was currently steering the boat. When her daughter came down to the deck to get a snack, I sidled up to her. Tammy, I didn't get a chance to thank you for coming out here with me. It means a lot when I have people working with me that I can trust. James, you gave us a chance to live in Hawaii, to get away from my cheating husband, and you thank me? She asked incredulously. Yes, I am thanking you. You were willing to abandon your daughter and move her far away from other family and friends to be here. I'm glad it's helping you and that you're doing so well here, but I still wanted to say thank you. Well, since you put it that way, you're welcome. Also, you should know that April has started calling you Uncle James. She really does look up to you, and I appreciate that. You are a good male role model in her life when she needs one so badly. I guess I just want to say I'm glad you're my friend. I patted her shoulder. The feeling is mutual. I'm glad you're mine too. So when I get back, let's have a big kebab or something. Sound good? Yeah, sounds great. I sat in silence for most of the short ride, just watching the waves and boats and other things going on around me. They dropped me off and I told them I would call them. I took a cab to the airport and the flight left a few minutes early. All in all, things were starting to look real. I decided I didn't want to waste any time. The flight landed almost 25 minutes early, and the tailwind cut the flight time down considerably. Less drag and all that. I didn't envy those big commercial pilots, even if they flew much more automated and comfortable airplanes. It always seemed to me that it would be like driving a bus, rather than the smaller, more personal airplanes I loved. Sure, it was more work, but I ended up feeling much more alive when I was in the air. As I approached baggage claim, there was a tan, large guy standing there with a sign that had my name on it. When I said large, I meant he was freaking huge. He reminded me of an early version of Hulk Hogan, before he started looking really old. I walked up to him and told him I was Mr. Holmes. He waited for me while I picked up my bag and then escorted me out the door to the waiting limousine. He held the back door for me, and as I got in, he said, "Ms. Pierce said she wanted to come get you, but unfortunately she couldn't. I'll take you to her house now." The trip to her house took almost 40 minutes, but it was the most comfortable car ride I had ever taken. The thing had everything, including a full bar. I decided to have one drink, some Indiana version of bourbon whiskey. It was pretty tasty, so I'll have to remember the name of the brand. As we pulled up to her house, the car drove through a 12-foot-tall wrought iron gate with spikes on top. The wall holding up the fence was 10 feet high and topped with something that looked like barbed wire. The wall went to the right and left of the gate for a considerable distance, and then met another wall, presumably a neighbor's wall. As soon as the chauffeur entered the house, we pulled into a long, winding driveway lined with the most exotic plants and trees I had ever seen. The car pulled up to the house and I stepped out of it in amazement. The front entrance was massive, with large columns framing the entrance. I couldn't even call it a door, so huge was it. It was like two dark wood doors inlaid with shiny black metal riveted to the wood. Honestly, it looked more like a castle than a house. The massive doors swung inward and Tanya appeared. She was dressed to kill, in tight jeans and some sports team t-shirt. She came down the steps and hugged me tightly. "I'm so glad you're okay and that you were able to make it," she exclaimed. "It's good to see you too." She hugged me even tighter and then let me go. She pulled my hand inside, not giving me time to worry about the bags. I think I saw someone take them from the limo driver before I was escorted into the entryway. The room was huge, but that was to be expected considering the size of the house. In the center was a beautiful wooden staircase with intricately carved banisters and red carpeting on each step. She turned to face me and swiftly stepped toward me to embrace me. Her lips found mine, and she put so much passion into the kiss that I was afraid we might leave black marks on the floor. She grabbed the back of my neck and ran her fingers through my hair from bottom to top. She ran her tongue over my lips, and for a brief moment I thought I could taste cherries. My tongue began to fight her tongue again, and it was a full 2 minutes before we broke off. Gasping, she looked up at me with heat in her eyes. "I've been waiting forever for this." I was shocked. "I've felt a connection with you before, but this was just incredible." "Welcome to my home," she said in a low, sultry voice. I followed her to the back of the house, through the large kitchen, to the back patio. Well, patio doesn't quite fit the description of her back porch. She literally had a pool, a hot tub, a small shack that was probably a bar, and what looked like a pool house or guest house. Outside of the huge patio was a yard so large that it could literally be turned into a golf course. Tall and proud trees grew along the edges of the lot, creating a natural visual barrier to enter and exit the oasis. The paths seemed to stretch endlessly, and a gazebo could be seen at the back of the lot. The overall picture was reminiscent of something out of poetry. I was no longer on the islands, but it was still Hakuna Matata time. I was going to do my best to enjoy this vacation and my time with Tanya. She led me over to a table with an umbrella and a few chairs by the pool. As I sat down, a slightly older woman approached the table. "James, this is Edith. She is not a maid, but she works for me. She likes to treat me like another one of her daughters, so she has become something of a second mom to me." "Hi, Edith. It's very nice to meet you." "Likewise. Can I get either of you something to drink?" she asked with a warm smile. "I'd love some ice water," I replied. It was warm enough outside and I was already feeling a little dehydrated. "Could you get me a glass of your sweet tea?" Tanya asked. "Sure, be right back," she replied, and walked out of the kitchen. "So, how was it for you coming back, away from the islands?" she asked me. "Tanya, it's weird. I mean, I really wanted to come visit you, but I'm really used to the slow pace of life on the islands. It might take a little getting used to you being back here in the hustle and bustle of the big city." "Then you've come to the right place. I know the city can be crazy, but my home is a refuge from it all," she said with a sly grin. We sat on her patio, enjoyed drinks, and discussed what we had done since she had visited Hawaii. She had a new movie starting in a couple weeks and was doing pre-production. She had the script and was rereading it. She also mentioned that there was another script that some unknown director had sent her and asked what she thought of it. Most of what she said didn't make much sense to me, since I'm not a Hollywood insider or anything like that. However, I was happy for her continued success. Almost an hour passed and she told me we should go out to dinner. She suggested a place she had gone to before and hoped I would like it. She said the place was called Providence's and was on Melrose Avenue. I had never been to that city, so I took her word for it. I just couldn't wait to spend time with her. I put on my only pair of khakis and a light blue button-down shirt that I had brought with me on the trip. I waited for her in the main lobby, and it seemed to take her quite a while. I knew how some women could be, so I just waited patiently. Edith offered me a drink, and I gladly accepted a glass of 12-year-old Scotch whiskey. She said it was her cheap drink. She said she had a half bottle of 25-year-old that was hiding somewhere in her office. I heard some movement at the top of the stairs and looked up to see a radiant beauty, shining like a disembodied angel, coming down to tell me I had died and gone to heaven. So, what do you think? I think she asked the dumbest question of all time. I replied, "You are stunning. I'm just blown away by your beauty today." I wasn't lying to her. It really took my breath away. The same limo was at the entrance to pick us up. I held out my hand and we walked out the front door together. The driver opened the door for her, and I took her hand as she slid into the back seat. I sat down next to her, and within minutes we were on our way. As we drove, we each had a glass of fruity white wine and just chatted about what we were going to do after dinner. I was sure what I wanted to do after dinner, and I hoped she felt the same way. We pulled up to the curb and the valet held the door for us to get out. The outside of the restaurant was artistically decorated, but otherwise looked unassuming for a supposedly posh seafood restaurant. As soon as she stepped onto the sidewalk, several paparazzi immediately appeared and pounced on her, asking all sorts of questions. "Who is this Tanya? Tanya, are you dating a new guy? Tanya, can you tell us anything about the new movie? What happened to Tyler? Is this guy your new boyfriend?" There were other shouted questions, but honestly, they were all starting to blend together for me. I took her hand and led her to the restaurant. We walked inside and the hostess led us into the main dining room. I was amazed at the size and elegance of the interior, as well as the overall attention to every detail. We were seated on the top floor, at one of the corner tables that had a great view of the entire establishment. "Sorry to hear the news. These guys never give up." I grinned. "That's okay. I need to feel like a rock star for a second. So they think I'm your boyfriend now?" I asked with a smirk. "And who's Tyler?" "Tyler was my boyfriend last year, but he and I haven't been together in months. We broke up consensually, mostly because we had nothing in common and couldn't talk properly. We just did it quietly to avoid unnecessary press. Now you can probably see why, right?" I reflected on that and decided that I didn't really care about her past. We both had a past, and that was the one I was going to leave behind. "Yep, you know, you're going to be a celebrity tomorrow, right? At least for a while. The guy who dated Tanya isn't a bad title, is it?" Her voice was light and flighty, but I could tell by the look on her face that she was nervous about my reaction. "Tanya, I didn't come to you to become instantly famous. I also don't want to be known as the guy who dated Tanya, although I don't mind dating you," I said, smiling. I reached across the table for her hand. "I came here to enjoy your company and hopefully reconnect with what I think we started on that beach." She smiled and squeezed my hands tightly in hers. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. So, changing the subject, how long are you in town for?" "I plan to be here for a week or so. It depends on a few things. Mostly I was hoping that you and I would have a chance to get to know each other better, and you could show me around like you promised." She smiled, remembering making that promise. "Okay, you're in. Starting tomorrow, we're going to visit a few of my favorite places in the city, as well as a few places no one knows about. Celebrity or not, I have my secrets too," the sly smile again. Either she really was a great actress, or she just enjoyed teasing me. I tend to think both are true. We continued our wonderful dinner date until it was time to leave. It was definitely not the kind of place where you worried about splitting the bill or calculating who was going to pay for it. There were only a few prices on the menu, and those were for chef's tasting lists. Tanya simply told the waiter to put it on our bill and she would pay later. I was beginning to doubt that this establishment was even allowed to leave cash on the table as a tip. I asked, "God, I feel out of place here. Should we leave a tip on the table?" We both smiled when I asked that. She opened her purse, pulled out $100 bill and placed it between the water glasses. "Do you think that's enough?" she asked with a giggle. I just nodded, and we stood up and headed for the door. The waiter ran ahead to the parking lot, and by the time we got there, our limo had pulled up to the curb. The paparazzi were still hanging around and shouting their flash questions, but we ignored them and got in the back seat. We took a quick drive to her house, and when we got there, she jumped on me right in the foyer. "Let's go upstairs, okay?" Her question left no room for doubt, so I just nodded and followed into the bedroom. The next day, we didn't leave the bedroom until almost noon when we got hungry. We had lunch and spent the afternoon driving around the neighborhood in her sporty Honda S2000. She could afford a better car, but she liked the way it looked. Those are her words, not mine. She showed me the sights, at least the ones she liked best. She took me to the Getty Center, where I was awed by the gardens and exhibits. It was a magical day with her. She took me to the vintage car museum at the Nethercutt Collection. She ended her list of her favorite places with Griffith Park. We had dinner at some upmarket place, unfortunately I couldn't pronounce the name of it, and afterwards we went to a nightclub called Lure. You could see that this place was really luring them in as it was packed. Its stardom ensured our entrance, but also that there were a lot of people there claiming her attention. I got us drinks and she was whisked away to dance with some blonde guy parodying a Ken doll. I was a little jealous, but just a little. I sat down at a small table for two and waited for her to return. After about 2 very fast songs with loud and strong beats, she came for me. I handed her a drink, and we laughed that we really couldn't hear each other. She nodded toward the patio and stood up. I followed her outside, and we were rewarded with warm night air and starry skies. It's usually like this out there, sorry. At least this view doesn't compare to anything else, right? The stars above us were indeed spectacular. There were a few other couples on the patio, and laughter came from the direction of a large group of people. All in all, it was a pleasant environment. "James, I want to visit you again soon. I have a few scenes to shoot over the next 2 weeks, but I'd love to come see you as soon as I'm done." "I think I'd really enjoy that," I smiled at the thought. We spent another hour at the club, had a few more drinks and danced. Yes, I finally got my old ass out and danced with her. The club was crowded and we were relieved to hear when we left. I thought the hard techno sounds coming from the club were cool, just not my usual cup of tea. My vacation came to an end 2 days later, after soaking up as much of the LA sun as I could. I wanted to spend more time on her back patio, but we both had our own lives. I was exhausted too. In my 42 years, I was no longer a spring chicken. Sure, I could still keep up, but how long would it last? On the way back, I had to be honest with myself. Tanya was in her prime, not only financially, but as a very active person. Would I be able to keep up with her? How should I even call her? My girlfriend. I decided to put my internal musings aside for later. When I got home, I found that Sean had ordered a few more parts and wouldn't be finishing the airplane for at least another week. I told him to keep at it and decided to take a little boat ride. I talked to Howard and arranged for Sean to stay with him for a few nights. I pulled out of the cove, drove along the coast, and found the perfect spot. The bay was nothing but a deserted beach, and there were no houses nearby. I dropped anchor and decided to just relax on the deck. I thought about Caitlin, I thought about Tanya, hell, I even thought about that hot young concierge Kim. Eventually, I went downstairs and had a light salad for dinner. I slept soundly, oblivious to the noise of the big city around me. The waves had their usual calming effect on me, and when I woke up, I felt as good as new. I decided to get up and start the day. And by seize the day, I meant I wouldn't actually just be sunbathing on one side. I might as well roll over. I was just about to roll over when I heard an airplane go by. It wasn't that close, but it still reminded me of flying. I really wanted to be at the controls again. I didn't like having to wait for my bird to be fixed. Sitting on the deck, I thought about my time alone on the island. Of course, this isn't movie material, but perhaps I could write a short story about it. Would anyone want to read it if I wrote it? It would actually be helpful for me to write down everything that happened. Frankly, I didn't care if no one ever read it. I would consider it my therapy for sitting broke for so many days. I pulled out a notepad and pen and started writing. After an hour, my hands were numb, and I realized I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. I ate a sandwich for lunch, washed it down with one of my beach rum drinks, how I missed them in LA, and went back out on deck. I started writing again until the sun started to set, and I had 3 drinks over the course of the evening. My writing looked pretty sloppy, so I quit the activity. My hand cramped up and I had to ice it. I hadn't written like that in years, probably since college. The next day was very similar, although I didn't write with the same fervor. My hands were still raw from what they had been through the day before. I went back to the marina and joined Sean and Howard for a nice dinner, followed again by too much alcohol. I really should keep a closer eye on Howard. The man is likely to die of liver failure and then old age. Maybe that was his secret agenda. The next day I got a call from Tanya. "Hi, James. Just wanted to let you know that filming on this movie has been delayed. I won't be able to make it for another 2 weeks. I'm sorry." There was regret in her voice. I wasn't going to upset her. "Don't worry, you'll still be able to come. Just let me know when. Okay?" Sure. "Okay, I'll see you then," I said as we both hung up. I was really starting to have feelings for her. How could this be? She's a famous actress. What the hell is she going to do when I'm around? Is there anything I can do to at least pretend to be her equal? I pondered this all night until I fell asleep. The next day, Sean informed me that the parts he needed were still being delivered. And then the thought hit me that I could try to be more in line with her lifestyle. I asked him if he wanted to drive down to LA with me, since we were basically just waiting for parts. He agreed. That's a damn good idea. I really need a break from this beast. The next day, the two of us were already on the airplane, heading back to LA. I didn't really like the big city, but I was starting to like this woman, and I was willing to do anything for her. We rented a car, and I booked Sean a room near her house in case she didn't want him in the guest room. I just hoped our showing up like this would make her happy. No, we pulled up to her house and Sean whistled when we stopped. The gate was open, and there were several cars parked in the driveway. I wondered if she was throwing a party or something. That could be a lot of fun. I parked the car and we walked to the door. I rang the doorbell and soon someone opened the door. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be Skip Cruz, another now very popular actor. However, I always inwardly laughed at the poor guy's name. He looked drunk or something, but at least he was smiling at us. "Hey guys, did you guys come to the party too?" "Yeah man, I'm a friend of Tanya's," I replied. "Have you seen her?" "Yeah, she's over there." He led us into the house and led us out to the back patio. There, sitting in one of the chaise lounges, was Tanya. Tyler Palmer, her ex, was sitting next to her. In that moment, I realized that things with her were really too good to be true. It was a hard moment, but I guess I should have seen it coming. He walked us out and said, "Hey babe, this guy says he's your friend." She opened her eyes and gasped. "James, oh my God, what are you doing here? I thought you were still in Hawaii." She jumped up, grabbed a towel, and ran into the house. "What's wrong, babe?" Tyler asked. I turned to Sean and said, "Let's go. I think showing up unannounced was a bad idea." I turned to Tyler and said, "She's all yours, dude." We were on our way out of her house when she ran out in her robe. "James, wait." I stopped in front of the rental and turned around. "Tanya, you don't need to explain anything to me. I should have known better." "James, things aren't what they seem." "Tyler, he's an ex-boyfriend who just shows up every now and then. Nothing happened to him." "Then what happened to your clothes? And why was he only wearing boxers?" After an awkward silence, "I thought so. Tanya, I was glad to have the opportunity to meet you. I hope you have a happy life here." "Please, James, can't we just talk about this? I don't want it to end like this. I really like you." Sean got in the car and I opened my door. "No, I think we've said enough. I really like you too, but I can't be with someone so deceitful. You said you're still shooting for a picture and you can't come see me. At least you could have done the decent thing and told me your ex was distracting you from your work. That would have saved me the trip. Goodbye, Tanya." With those words, I got into the car. She stood there crying, but I'm not sure she even knew why. Maybe it was a princess reaction to losing something she loved? I was hurt by her betrayal, but had to remind myself that we weren't married after all. I just assumed we were in a mutually exclusive relationship, and we all know about assumptions. They tend to make asses out of you and me. Anyway, we went back to the hotel to spend the night and returned to Molokai the next day. She sent me several text messages and left me one voice message, all of which I deleted. It was time to move on and get back to a happy life in Hawaii. I was sad that our brief romance was over, but at the same time I was glad I hadn't gotten involved before I knew it. The end. If you haven't watched the first part of this video, the link will be in the description. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.